Namaskar and welcome to this astrology session. We have an amazing author today who has written a book on various topics concerned with Sanatan Dharma and Hinduism. And one of the most popular book he had written is called Sabrimala Confusion, and where he has talked about menstruation cycles in different cultures. And so it is an important part of the history that he has mentioned, and he has been a great practitioner of what he teaches. So, without delay, would like to welcome Sri Nitin Sridhar. Namaskar, Nitin ji.
Namaste. Very happy to be here.
So, Nitin, what inspires you to write on the culture and the topics that you have chosen?
Uh, it is difficult to pinpoint any one thing as an inspiration, but writing has been my desire, my skill, or one thing that I really love to do from a long time. See, I come from a civil engineering background, but now I have shifted completely to journalism since 2015, and one of the reasons was that in the construction field I could not write, and the topics that appeals to me most is topics related to Sanatana Dharma, the philosophical aspect as well as the practice aspect, and as well as the issues that is affecting Hindu civilization currently. So, what strikes me, what inspires me, how do I choose the topic? I think sometimes it is the current situation, certain debates. Often, some of my books or some of my essays are result of my debates with somebody on the internet, or something that I have seen the issue happening in the, for the example, the Shabarimala book on menstruation. It was a the journey started with how the media narrative on Shabarimala happened, and how using Shabarimala as a issue, there was an entire anti-Hindu narrative, again, saying that Hinduism oppresses women, sidelines women by treating menstruation as impure. So I thought nobody's speaking about it. So let me just investigate what is the truth. I mean, it started as a investigation into truth. When I studied the Shastras, various texts, and all. And then I thought this is something that needs to be taken to larger world, larger people, because there is a lot of confusion, there is a lot of misinterpretation. So I tend to take up topics that are controversial. I have written on the issue of sati, I have written on the issue of abortion, and mostly all of them are from a dharmic perspective, from a dharma shastric perspective. And I like to take up topics that others do not want to touch.
No, that's true. I read your book, and you mentioned that this topic particularly because it affects the accusation against the Sanatan Dharma, which is you mentioned polytheistic culture, and sometimes I have a being in US, I have a different take on polytheism because we see how the Abrahamic faiths, according to them, polytheism is Satanism and also paganism. So polytheism, when they mention, that means that is condemned by the church or the mosque completely. Means the punishment for that is death. So I rarely use that term, but I saw that term and I wanted to get a clarification from you. What did you actually mean?
uh, See, I think the bias against the prejudice against polytheism is a creation of the monotheism, and now we are slowly having scholars who are challenging this bias. A good friend of mine, Professor Edward Butler, for example, he has his main work focuses on polytheism, and he's trying to get rid of this stereotype. So in my book, I have focused on all these indigenous traditions across the world, and as part of this examination, I have examined the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, and all of them share a lot of commonalities with our own Sanatana Dharma. So, as I see it, in my very limited understanding, because I have not done any deeper study of polytheism per se, but as I see it, one thing is the polytheism, that there is a multiple devatas, multiple deities, and we are worshipping that. But at the same time, it is untrue that polytheism, by definition, means there is a lack of universal reality. That is not true. As I came to know recently in a discussion with Edward Butler, that even polytheism recognizes these traditions recognize the presence of an underlying unifying reality. I mean, something similar to what we have Vedantic Brahman, right? So this Brahman is the underlying substratum of everything, and it is Brahman who manifests as various devatas, right? So in this way, I see a lot of commonality in life, in how we approach things between Sanatana Dharma and these polytheistic or indigenous traditions across the world.
No, absolutely right. See uh, the connotation of what the Western authors speak, that makes a difference. What do they actually, connotation is what? And the when you grew up in Abrahamic faith, your mind is so set on anti-infidels or kafir or heretics, then it is very difficult. Like if you look at their history, right from uh, third third century BC, AD, like after the
Mhm.
Jesus had left the planet, actually almost 400 years after he died, they have tried to their what they're trying hard is to legitimize themselves. So everyone is trying to get the legacy of Jesus into their hands, and while doing so, they have when they have started colonization in 1492, they have started trying to export that ideology on the basis of belief. Means you can believe in anything. You can believe in a pen, you can believe in a paper, you can believe in anything. For them, belief is more important than experience. Whereas our culture talks about experience more important than belief. So this is a two stark contrast. So they are going to keep on attacking you because you don't follow their belief. It's like if it is my opinion, then it's my way or the highway. That's the entire system in which they work on. So how do you try to rationalize this kind of irrational thought?
You make a very important observation, and I would like to add few things. There is a role for belief and faith in even our system. The term we use is Shraddha. Bhakti is a different thing, but Shraddha. But there is a vital difference, which you also noted, that Shraddha means taking upon some pramana as a valid means of knowledge
That's right.
until that knowledge is reached, that is experience. That is, there is a first hand of knowledge. Until the first hand knowledge is received, the Shraddha acts as a pointer. It is a trust waiting to be verified, waiting to be realized, right? So we have a very important role for Shraddha. In fact, any systems, it may be Vedanta, it may be Bhakti, or whatever system is, we begin the journey with Shraddha, but we do not end the journey with Shraddha. The end happens with Sakshatkara, the
That's
experience, right? And between this, the Shraddha and the Sakshatkara, there are various pramanas. Important of this is this Shastra pramana. So I think I would like to bring in a side issue related to this. Uh, One of the important allegation is that the Hindu acharyas or Hindu tradition did not critique the Islam and the Christian theologies, right? The way the one sampradaya has critiqued other sampradayas, like Advaita critiquing Sankhya, Dvaita sampradaya critiquing Advaita, this has not happened to a large extent with respect to Islam and Christianity. This allegation, this has value, merit, correct. But one thing we are forgetting is to have this Shastrartha, a debate, there has to be a common pramana, common acceptance that we will accept this pramana as a valid means of knowledge. But there is no such thing between Sanatana system and the Abrahamic system. Abrahamic system works in its own logic, in its own faith, in its own whole system. Wherein, I mean, even in there, for example, Christianity has this their doctrines of one God or the Trinity and everything is faith based. It's similar in Islam. So there is no common ground between us and them. So there is no scope for debate. So I don't see any scope for any kind of religious debates or interfaith dialogue as far as theological point is concerned. So I think we need Hindus should not be under an illusion that such a theological dialogue will bring much value. There may be the only way to move forward is I am not opposed to having a dialogue, but our position theologically must be one of strength, one of conviction rather than of a compromise. Because we are the only one who compromise. The other side never compromises. And our present condition of compromising on everything under the false premises like all religions are equal or sarvadharma samabhava or vasudhaiva kutumbakam, these are all faulty premises. These needs to be our dharmacharyas never propagated these faulty premises. Even this vasudhaiva kutumbakam, which is a shastra, is present in one of the upanishads. It has a particular spiritual context. It cannot be applied to a political context. So our interaction with the other religions is a political interaction. It cannot be a theological interaction as far as Abrahamic religions are concerned, because they do not agree for any common ground for a debate. For example, a debate between Vaidika and Bauddha had a common ground of Tarka Shastra, but we do not have that common ground with this Abrahamic. So I think this needs to be kept in mind, and however forward we go, we need to make our position very clear, very strong, and compromise. I think that this is the only way to go forward.
No, you put a very solid point and a very strong point in terms of the points of collaboration. Because I can tell you that in USA, most of the interfaith meetings end up nowhere. It generally end up accepting the Christian viewpoint or the Judaistic viewpoint or an Islamic viewpoint. And if you look at theologically, all three are competing. So if you see Islam, then it has rejected Old Testament and New Testament, when Islam is a 90% copy of the Old Testament. And the New Testament has come from Old Testament with the Buddhist teachings. So Quran is trying to purify Christianity, and Christianity is trying to purify Judaism. And Judaism says that I am the source of all three, or all two of you. So there is a competition there, and so I think you made a very valid point that the Sanatan Dharma, we cannot have any theological interfaith dialogue with them. In fact, I can tell you, in all the interfaith conferences I've gone, it has been a disaster. I thought that sitting in Starbucks is better than going to any of those conferences. And so the good point that you made on the this thing about the interfaith, about the political dialogue. Now, you also observed very correctly that we cannot argue with them because there is no philosophy with them. There is no philosophy. It's like you put your brain in the freezer and then listen to what I say. And so Indians cannot work because it's the nature of the culture. They're inquisitive and they can ask questions. And that's why the church and mosque in India are having problems with Indians, because they're asking questions. Where does that come from? And they have to literally take out their sword and kill their throat if they have to stop the question. My next question to you is this political dialogue between Sanatan Dharma and any of these Abrahamic faiths, how is that possible? Because most of the Sanatan Dharmi still do not understand that what the Abrahamic faith stands for. They all stand for power. So how does that happen? How can that happen?
Uh, Rather than a dialogue, I would say we need to think about this engagement or how do we go forward. There is a, let me be very clear by keeping aside all political correctness. There is a civilizational war going on in India, and there is a very good chance that within 50 years or maybe 100 years, there may be serious demographic changes which will be inimical to Sanatana Dharma and Hindu civilization. So it is a uh, engagement between a predator or multiple predators and a prey, and we are the prey here. Let there be no doubt about it. The Sanatana Dharma is the prey. The Abrahamics, the communists, and all the other forces at play, the Breaking India forces, if I have to borrow Sri Rajiv Malhotra's phrase, they are the predators. So we need to learn a lesson or two from our texts like Panchatantra, how a prey can outwit the predators. And only then we can actually engage or dialogue. Sama, Dama, Dhanda, Beda. But the problem is we are stuck at the first levels of Sama or dialogue and all. We don't understand the notion of Veda. We don't understand the notion of Danda because we have been colonized to such an extent that we are told, we are made to believe that 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 everything is good, everything is fine, everyone is equal, every religion is equal, every religion teaches the same. Don't blame the book, don't blame the religion, but blame the people for their deviations without realizing, without ever reading the book. I mean, this is the problem only with the Hindus. This is the problem only with us, unfortunately, because the others are very clear in their goals, as you mentioned in the beginning. They have a clear understanding who the kafir is, who the infidel is. But most of the Hindus today have not even heard of a term called mleccha, for example. That term, nobody likes to use that term because there's a lot of negative connotation to it. But in its very simple meaning, without going into the how historically it evolved or anything like that, it simply means the outsiders, the non those who are different from us, those who are do not subscribe to our Sanatana value systems, our civilizational beliefs. But we have lost these frameworks for analyzing the situation. The current Hindu society's current condition is we are living as a dhimmi in our own country. It's a dhimmi status that we are living in because we have scholarships of minority scholarships in India. Crores and crores of rupees is going there. The funds from the temples are government controlled, but then they are diverted to non-Hindu activities. The masjids and the churches are free from government control. It is just like as if the secular state has become an Abrahamic state, and Hindus are living as a second-class citizen. The fact is, we are living as a kind of a secularized version of a Dhimmi state, right? Dhimmi society. So in my opinion, this dialogue or this engagement, whatever it is, however we see it, we are at a disadvantaged position currently, and we need to rise from this state to a state of power. So you rightly pointed out that Islam, Christianity, and these civilizations, these Abrahamic religions, they have a very clear concept of power. I remember Anwar Sheikh, if I am not wrong, he's called this Islam as an Arab imperialism, right? So they have a very clear concept of power. And unfortunately, own frameworks, which also speaks about power, a dharmic power, a power of because uh, dharma cannot without power, right? So if there is artha, then there is dharma. You can do dharma only when there is artha. Artha does not mean only wealth; it also means power. So we need to we need to reconnect with our own ethos, our own philosophies beyond what the colonized education system tells us that this is your heritage. Because colonized education system is a compromised system. It is designed to make us weak. Swami Vivekananda used to say, the power is strength. The weakness is a sin. Weakness is death. Like the power is something like that he used to say, and that is very important. We need to have a concept of power. We had a concept of power. We just need to reconnect with it, re-understanding it, and use it, apply it in our to handle today's situation. Because we are the prey here, and only way we can change this dynamic is through gaining power and gaining it and properly using it in a proper way, and not just from the point of weakness, right?
No, you mentioned very important points. Like there are a lot of misconceptions that we have not attacked anyone. That is one of the misconceptions. And whereas Narad Muni tells Yudhishthir, you should always attack the enemies and destroy them before they become powerful. So we are not ourselves following our scriptures, which, and also you rightly said that colonization has created a deep impact. Like British policy was to disarm the Indian citizens. In fact, culinary poetry was banned, and the misconception was spread that Mahabharata, if you keep, it happens, there'll be fight in the family. All these are misconceptions, mythology that has been spread around. In fact, Mahabharata teaches you how to defend yourself and your dharma, and that's why I call it sathology. And also the other scriptures, they actually make you strong. If anyone reads Bhagavad Gita, then Krishna says very clearly, "Yuddhicha palayanam," that not running away from battlefield, we fight face to face. And the third thing has been that the imposition of caste system by the Portuguese. The word caste is a Portuguese word, and the British 1901 census is the first time they said there are 7 upper castes, and so the caste system is actually was enforced as a law of the land. So colonization has deep impact. But at the same time, after independence, everyone asks, what did you remove after independence? You got the independence, but what did you remove? So we are still following the 1920 Indian Police Act. We are still following 1920 in India, at least, following the Indian civil services, which were designed to colonize India. And still, there are a lot of things of the colonization, including the taxes on Hindu temples, which was levied by the Islamic uh, mosques, and still continuing today. And the British made it a policy to continue their system because they were getting huge revenue from the temples, and the Indian government has still not done it. And if you look at the comparison with Burma, the first thing they became 1948, they decided not to join British Commonwealth. They decided not to have all the British laws are removed. They did not, so they completely started on a blank slate. They may not have grown like India, but they have a very clean society. So when they decided to remove Rohingya, they did it. So very clearly. So India has been stuck with political correctness and adharmic behavior. So they may call themselves Hindu leaders, but actually the policies have been adharmic. So what do you have to say on that?
uh, at first I would like to add to what you say. We have in the Ramayana a very clear statement when Rama hesitates to kill one of the Rakshasis. I think it was Tataka, I'm not sure. Vishwamitra says him very clearly, slay the adharma wherever you find them. Do not hesitate thinking that it is a woman. That is, in the normal sense, women should not be harmed, right? So that is the normal dharmic understanding. That is our cultural understanding, right? So, but in the case, this understanding does not apply when you are dealing with adharma. So all the dharmic concessions do not apply when you are dealing with adharma. So and when we speak about this, that we are we have never attacked anyone and all these things, they forget very important things like we have this notion of Rajasuya Yajna, Ashwamedh Yajna. What were they? Chakravarti Samrat. These are all political, religio-political things. Ashwamedha Yajna was not just a symbolic thing like many people tend to believe today. It is not just a metaphor. Ashwamedha Yajna is a real yajna. It is happens on the ground, and only a monarch can do it. And he did it by occupying lands, by defeating kings, by defeating kingdoms, by making the kingdoms accept his sovereignty, right? So these in the face of these facts, I don't know why. I think we have been too much too much brainwashed with the Gandhian ahimsa and the Gandhian distortion of Hindu Dharma. It's a colonial distortion, I would add, and it has been continuing post independence by successive governments. The whole education system is faulty. I mean, in the name of secularization of education, our children are being taught to hate their traditions, to disinherit their knowledge systems, to disinherit whatever they have received from our ancestors, and to hate them, not just disinherit. They become develop an apathy towards it. They become ignorant of it. Uh, See, when I use the term tradition or heritage, some may say, why should we save this heritage? Because that question itself is faulty, because it comes from a modern bias, a bias of this modernity itself, which posits what is post-industrial revolution, what is Western modernity, what is rooted in modern science, a scientism as the only truth, as the only knowledge, and everything else, especially the cultural knowledge, the knowledges that we have inherited from our past, they are all superstition, they are all useless. So we have inherited, we have imbibed this particular bias, and we are doing it each year, year after year in the schools, right? So our school education alienates completely, especially the English language school education, of which we are all part. So I mean, the long-term solution is the education, but that is something government has to do. It has to be done top down. What can we do at an individual level? I last year in 2019, I wrote an article called essay in India Facts titled "Agenda for Hindu Survival." What we individuals can do, because we cannot keep on waiting for the governments to do, the leaders to do, because they may not always do. They may have their own calculations. But it is also true that not everything can be done by an individual, but at least we can try it at our own level. For example, in the case of education, it is becomes a duty of a Sanatana parents to uh, teach Sanatana Dharma to the children, the philosophy, the practice. But unfortunately, our whole generation themselves they're quite ignorant. They do not know what Sanatana Dharma is. They think Hindu Dharma is all about pacifism, Sarva Dharma Samabhava, and all these nonsense things. But they do not know what is Dharma. And they do not know very basic concepts, very basic things like what is an Upanishad, what is a Veda. They don't know what is the notion of Pramana. They don't understand the concept of Pramana. See, my short book on Samanya Dharma, I specifically wrote it for our young audience, our uh, people who are completely disinherited from our dharma. It's a very short, it's just 100-page book, and I have merely listed the ethical values that are part of this central to our Hindu civilization worldview. I have also clarified how that ethical values have to be applied. For example, ahimsa. We all have such a misunderstanding of ahimsa that the Mahabharata statement, ahimsa paramadharma, we completely misinterpreted. We have other statements in other texts which clearly show that ahimsa paramadharma does not mean that you give in to pacifism. You do not fight adharma. No, fighting adharma, the violence or the violence or the himsa used for the sake of dharma is also ahimsa. The Shastras are very clear. For example, in a particular yagya, certain pashu has to be sacrificed. That sacrifice is not himsa, it is ahimsa. Similarly, waging a war for self-protection, or if it may be for self-preservation by increasing your kingdom, it is ahimsa, not ahimsa, right? So these things I have highlighted with examples in the book, and it is my hope that these fundamental things are understood by our kids, our parents, and they pass it on. It's a duty of the fundamental duty of the parents. See, we are so become alienated. We do not understand the concept of. See, we have this in the Hinduism. We have this. The children are very important. Having children is very important. Why? Because the children, they are part of ourselves because they have come out of our body. So they are the people who will be doing the duties that we are doing currently. We will be giving them all the knowledge, everything that we have learned, everything that we have received to them. So they are the futures of society. Such holistic concept is completely missing today. The whole marriage system, it has become one of convenience rather than uh, rooted in the three pillars of rati, dharma, and praja. We have removed dharma, we have removed praja, and there is only rati. There is nothing wrong with rati per se, unlike some folks who keep saying nowadays the Hindus have come up with a lot of nonsensical theories like Kama Sutra is a British creation. It is a very perverted text. They don't know anything. They haven't read it in translations, perhaps in originals, but they don't understand it. And unfortunately, it is the section of Hindus who create all these nonsensical theories without understanding the fact that dharma, artha, kama, moksha, they are all part of the same purushartha drishti. And this drishti is central to Hindu dharma, and we have lost this drishti. So to return to your question, I think it is fundamentally a duty of a parent. If parents take upon this duty, then I am sure a lot of Hindu children will not grow up as a dhimmi, will not grow up as a someone who is ignorant about the political challenges, the civilization challenges that we are facing, or our own dharmic roots, our philosophy. Instead, they will grow up as able person rooted in our dharma, as a fighters for our dharma, and in their own way. Fighters does not mean you have to pick up a gun and go and fight. If you can pick up a pen and write something, that is also a fight. You can perform a dance and keep up this tradition, that is also a fight. So my essay, I have given a lot of suggestions on what individuals can do in their own fields, in their own way, in a small way. If even a small, we are such a huge population. If every one of us does a very small thing, even that the collective effort would be very huge.
No, you said very important points here. Number one, you said about to remove adharma. It's I put in my second book, The Making of a Statesman, where Narada tells Yudhishthir that you have to use your Sanya Shakti to expand Sanatan Dharma. And so, whenever the Indian government cries that another terrorist has come to India and trying to kill, the whole world laughs, actually. Americans laugh because Americans think that again a crybaby has come. 70 years crying is a lot of crying. And when a nation of 1.3 billion people cries, their government cries, it reflects that all the people are crying. So it's difficult for American Hindus to also explain. So they have to ignore it because the media is continuing to cry. And another important point you mentioned about the education, I call it the re-spiritualization of society. There are a lot of wrong notions being told that Hindus cannot defend, they have to depend on the police. And whereas our Shastra says that the head of the family should have the weapons to protect themselves. So by the time Muslims or any other community attacks Hindus, it's all done. After that, nothing is left. The police will do the post-mortem and the crime will begin. and all the WhatsApp artists will cry, and everyone will cry, and that's the end of the story. So the proactiveness in the Hindu community, like you rightly said, is because of lack of understanding about their own culture. And if the day they will understand that, and that's our goal for Sathology platform, is to debunk all kind of mythology being said or spoken anywhere. So like, what a wonderful talk you gave, deep realizations you have, and also deep research you have done. I would like to give you the forum. What you like to conclude in this talk, and we'll definitely invite you more in the future.
To is a request to all Hindu parents, all Hindu people in general, to become more familiar with your own traditions, your own family traditions, and then your Kula Dharmas, and then the larger traditions, the larger Samanya Dharma, the Vishesha Dharma, the Shastras, to the extent possible. Everybody do not need to read everything, right? So we need to become more aware about our own tradition, our own culture, our own philosophy, our history, and the current situations. We need to be realistic, and we need to recognize the threats that is happening, and we need to make our younger generation aware of these threats, and we need to train them for future handling of this. And this is very crucial, and this is my message to everyone who is listening, and to the audience who are in the US. I say that you should not give up your roots to India. You should not make US as a permanent home if possible, because in India is the Matarbhumi, the Karma Bhumi, and a Dharma Bhumi. And I hope we would see a renaissance, a revival of Hindu civilization. An optimist in me speaking that despite all the threats that is there, maybe in another 50 to 100 years, uh, we will no longer be a prey, we will be powerful. And request people to read my books on Sanatana Dharma, on menstruation, on other issues. Those interested can read them, they buy them on Amazon, and they can read my writings, articles on India Facts and few other websites, and share your comments and feedback if anything with me. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, and everywhere. Okay, thank you, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. And I'm happy to share my thoughts with your audience.
So you are welcome to write on Sathology.com platform as well. So if you ever want to write there, there's a reach in the US. Thank you. Namaskar, and keep on watching.
Namaste.